When we used to have lots of little kids here, and I hope we have lots of little kids here again sometime really soon, but when we used to have lots of them running around, we would gather them up on this front step and we would sing songs with them all the time. Every Sunday morning we would sing some sort of kid's song or two. And one of the ones that we sang a lot was the old song that used to go, "If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands." And I wondered every time we sang that, I often wondered if there was anybody in the church building that just didn't feel like clapping that day. You know, we made the kids clap. If you're happy and you know how to clap your hands, you got to do it. But I often wondered, is there anybody here who, if they were sitting up front, just wouldn't clap their hands? They were here, but they weren't happy. They were here, but they were having trouble or having problems, or they were just kind of here. What if you come this morning and you're not just bubbly and happy? Is there a place for you here today? Because that's sort of a tough place to be, because lots of times, as I say, our songs are about joyful things, and our songs are about everything's going to be fine, and God's looking after you, and things are going to work out. And what if you're here today and you don't feel so good about how things are? And what if you don't know how things are going to work out? As I said, that's a tough place to be when everybody else is happy, or at least pretending to be happy, and you're not. Back in 1987, I guess, actually, I was an intern out at the congregation in Wawota up by Moose Mountain Provincial Park, and I'd been at the church there for a couple of weeks, and I was planning to go home for the first couple of days of a coming week, for the Monday, Tuesday, and I was all packed up and ready to go on Sunday morning. We were going to go to church, and I was going to jump in my car and go home for a couple of days, and I was really looking forward to going home. I was a little bit homesick. It was my first time away from home, and I didn't know anybody at Wawota really, and I just was really looking forward to going home. And on Sunday morning, just as I was about to get in my car and leave, one of the guys came up and said, "Hey, we need some help out at the camp. We've got more kids coming to camp than we thought we were going to, and we could use somebody to be in the cabin with some of them. And so, would you come be one of the counselors for the week?" The guy who asked me to do that was my boss, and I didn't think I could say no, so I said sure. And I dragged myself out to the camp. And so at the campfire that night, all the kids are having a great time because they love being at camp, and I hated it. I didn't want to be there at all. I just hated being there. And everybody else is happy, and everybody else is having a great time, and everybody else is seeing their friends, and I didn't know anybody, and all I wanted to do was leave. Do you know what that feels like? You know what it feels like to have sort of something going on, but you can't really talk about it. Everybody else seems fine, so you don't want to talk about it, so you just kind of bury it. And is that your only choice? Is that your only choice when it comes to spiritual things? That you just stuff it down? You just put a fake smile on and go and pretend you're happy because everybody else is pretending they're happy. Is there any place at church for anything other than happy? I want to tell you today that there is. I want to tell you today that the God who created your blessings and your happiness, as Ron prayed in the sermon today, is still the same God that walks with you through the hard things that are happening. I want to tell you today that there is a place to come here when you're not feeling good, when you're not feeling hopeful, when you're not feeling joyful. This is the place for you. You don't have to stay away, and you don't have to pretend you're okay. In fact, there is an entire book in the Old Testament called Lamentations. Lamentations means crying. It's an entire book of crying. There are piles of psalms that talk about how the psalmist isn't feeling close to God or isn't feeling hopeful, or we're going to look at one of those today. And I want to tell you, the church isn't just for the happy. That worship isn't just for those who are feeling good. In fact, worship is the place you need to be when things don't feel so good. So if you're here this morning and you're sad about something, that's okay. Or if you're frustrated, or if you're hurt, or if you're grieving. And there's lots of ways to grieve. You can be grieving someone who passed away, as we talked about this morning. You can grieve the loss of your youth and the things you used to do. You can grieve relationships that aren't working out the way you wanted to. Grief is a real thing that comes in lots of forms. If you feel sad and grieving today, you're welcome here. God is waiting for you. If you are worried or anxious about anything, if you're feeling loss or disappointment, if you're feeling doubt today, if you're feeling anything but happy, I want to tell you that this is part of your experience with God. And it's not an anomaly, it's not something that you ought to get rid of, it's something you ought to do something else with. There's a different way to handle all those emotions than just stuff them down and put a smile on your face. In fact, David shows us a better way. David shows us what to do in several places. Psalm 6 is one of them. In the 6th Psalm, David has a different plan. And here's what it sounds like. Let's read the psalm together, and then we'll go back through and look at what he does. Because his pattern for handling his sadness is a pattern we ought to see and know for ourselves. Here's what Psalm 6 says. O Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger. Rebuke is a word that means to put off or get rid of or chastise or hurt. David's saying, don't push me away, Lord. David knows right from the start that he can't go away from God when he's sad. He's got to be near God. That's worth hearing if you don't hear anything else. You're welcome to approach God with your feelings. Do not rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your wrath. Be merciful to me, O Lord, for I am faint. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are in agony. My soul is in anguish. How long, O Lord? How long? Stop there for half a second. Have you ever asked that question? How long is this going to go on? Well, why doesn't this end? If you've ever asked that question, David knows how you feel. Verse 4. Turn, O Lord, and deliver me. Save me because of your unfailing love. No one remembers you when he's dead. Who praises you from the grave? But I'm worn out from groaning. All night long I flood my bed with weeping and drench my couch with tears. My eyes grow weak with sorrow and they fail because of all of my foes. Away from me, all of you who do evil, for the Lord has heard my weeping. The Lord has heard my cry for mercy. The Lord accepts my prayer. All my enemies will be ashamed and dismayed. They will turn their backs in sudden disgrace. One of the things about this psalm is it doesn't tell us what's going on in David's life. And so sometimes that makes it harder to deal with because you don't know the background. But in this case, I think it's better that we don't know the background because now these words apply to whatever your background is. Whatever it is that might be at some point, either today or in the future. Maybe you don't need this lesson today, but maybe you'll need it next week. At some point, you're going to feel sad. At some point, you're going to feel disappointed. At some point, you're going to be hurt. At some point, you're going to be mourning something. At some point, you're going to need to know, what do I do when I don't feel great? How do I approach God? Well, here's David's plan. Number one, David decides that he's going to confess how he feels. And that's the starting point. And again, I've alluded to this several times already, but let me just say it as clear as I can. If you feel bad and you just stuff that down and don't deal with it, if you feel poorly and you just stuff that down and put a fake smile on your face, if you feel sad and you don't tell anyone, number one, it doesn't help. Number two, it doesn't allow anyone else to help you because you're not being honest. And number three, it's going to come back in a bad way. Every time you stuff your feelings down and deny how you feel, it comes out somewhere else. It comes out in anger. It comes out in snippiness. It comes out in tears. It comes out in bad acting. It comes out somewhere. So David knows well enough that I better confess this. I better be honest about how I'm feeling. And so he tells God how he's feeling. And I want you to hear the words. I made a list for you of the words he uses to describe his feelings. And again, maybe you feel this today. Maybe you know what this is like. He says, number one, I am almost faint from all the stress I'm under. I'm almost ready to collapse. I can't take another thing. That's what the word faint means there. He says, I'm in anguish. Anguish is one of the strongest words in the Hebrew language, the word that he uses here. He says, I'm just so weighed down. I can't take another thing. I am asking how long this is going to happen. How long will this keep going? I just can't take it. By the way, the word faint there is like a plant that is withering. It's drying up. The leaves are falling off. It's near the end. That's how he feels. And he says, how long is this going to go on? I can't take it anymore. Do you know that feeling? Maybe you do. If you know that feeling, David says, you better confess it to God and probably to someone else. Get some help. He goes on to say, I'm worn out. Again, the word worn out there is a very vivid one that doesn't come across so well in the English, but the Hebrew word is of something that has no potential left. You've used it up. You've emptied it out. I'm just done. You get the idea. He says, I've been groaning every day. One of the most descriptive things he says is that I'm flooding my bed with tears. In fact, some translations say I'm drowning in my tears on my bed. I just lay there and cry. Do you know that? Do you feel that helplessness, or have you ever felt that? Because that's how he feels. He says, verse 7, my eyes are weak with sorrow. His eyes are weak with sorrow. He's been looking at his problems so much that he can't even see them anymore. Things are going blurry. He's looked at it so much. And my foes are all around me, he says. One of the interesting things is that when you compare this passage with other Psalms, David other times says, my foes are all around me and I'm ready to go. I'm ready to fight. I've got God on my side. I'm ready. This time he says, my foes are all around me and I don't know what to do. What normally would have challenged him, what normally would have made him stand up strong, what normally would have made him courageous, has made him cowardice. Has made him back up. He doesn't know how he's going to win this thing. He doesn't know what to do. And my foes are all around me. And I just want you to look at that list and go back and read it in your own translations if you want, because they'll pick different words, but the ideas are there. And I just want you to feel the emotion of what David is writing here, what he's confessing. This is not made up. This is how he is. This is how he feels. And I want to stress one thing to you, that emotions are important. That's one of the other good things we do in church. Good things. We say, when you come through the door, park your emotions. We don't want emotional responses. But important things are emotional. It matters how you feel. Your feelings are important. In fact, it doesn't matter even really what's happening. It matters how you feel about it. Your feelings change how you're going to act. Your feelings change how you're going to respond. Your feelings dictate what's going to happen next. You've got to feel what you're feeling, and you've got to connect to other people who are feeling like this. We cannot just come and sit apart 6 feet away from each other and not connect. We've got to connect to where people really are at, or we will never pray for each other. We will never help one another. You've got to figure out how each other are feeling about things. Not just what's happening, but how they feel about it. Because feelings determine everything else. When I first moved here, I had a 1973 or 4 Plymouth Duster car. An old junky car that I bought for my brother. And one day when Canadian Tire was still over here, I had taken it over to Canadian Tire because one of the tires was wearing funny. It was needing an alignment. It was wearing out the inside of the wheel. And so I didn't have a lot of money. I just started working here. I didn't have much of anything. But I dragged this old car over there and I told him I needed him to fix the alignment so it didn't wreck my tires and cost me more money. So I'm sitting here in the office in the back corner waiting for them to call, and they finally did call, but they called a lot quicker than I thought they would. And they called and said, "Tim, we can't fix your car. Your front end is just shot. It's completely wrecked. There's no way we should ever put enough money into this old junky car to fix it. And so we're not going to fix it. We're not going to do anything. You're on your own. In fact, it's probably not even safe to drive." So I answered that phone call, and most of you, if you got that phone call right now, might be angry or upset. You might be mad, but most of you would take it in stride, probably. You'd think, well, I got to get another car. But I didn't have any money. I didn't have anybody to back me up. I didn't have anybody on my side who could help me. And so I got that phone call, and I sat in my office and cried. I had no idea what I was going to do. Kelvin came in. I don't know if he remembers it, but he came in and asked me what was going on, and I told him. I think he took me for ice cream or something afterwards. I'm sure on that day, Kelvin would have said, "What are you crying about? This isn't a big deal. It's not the end of the world." But to me it was, because I didn't know what I was going to do. It felt like a huge thing. Your feelings are important. And how you feel then determines what you will do. Prophet Jeremiah had a friend, a helper by the name of Baruch. And Baruch works with Jeremiah all through trying to get God's people to listen, and they never listen. They never do what they're asked to do. And Baruch is always taking these messages from Jeremiah to the people, and no one wants to hear. Finally, Baruch says one day, "I'm just worn out with groaning, and I've got no rest. I am sick and tired of this." He just has a little fit because his emotions got to him. He's just done. Incidentally, if you go read Jeremiah 45, God says, "I'm going to help you. I'll be with you, Baruch. Don't worry, you're not alone." But he felt alone. Because he felt alone, it was a big deal. So I just want to remind you that the first step is to admit how you're actually feeling. Please don't pretend. Please don't shake someone's hand this morning if you're not feeling up to it and just say, "Well, I'm fine." Please don't be fake, because fake doesn't help anyone. Fake doesn't help in your relationship with God. It doesn't help in your relationship with each other. If there's something we can pray for, if there's some way we can help, if there's some way we can encourage, if you need anything today, please talk to someone. That's what David does. Confesses it to God, and I'm assuming he confesses it to others as well. Don't stuff things down. Don't pretend you don't feel anything. It doesn't help. So, David does his first thing. He confesses his feelings. But here's the next thing he does. And the really good thing he does next is really important, because sometimes people get stuck in this cycle, right? Where they just think about their problems all the time. And every time you talk to them, all they talk about is their problems. And it just drags everybody down, including them. And it's just a spiral of, I'm thinking about how bad everything is all the time. But David does another thing in this psalm that's really important. He not only confesses his feelings, but he comes back and he remembers God's nature. So he remembers who he's dealing with. He remembers who he's worshiping. So go back through the psalm again with me and look at the other list of things. He first lists his problems, but now he lists what God is about, what God will do. He remembers who God is. And so he uses words like this. He says, God is merciful. He says, be merciful to me, O God. Why? Because he remembers that God is merciful. God's not out to get him. God's not out to punish him. God is actually merciful. And he remembers that. I need to remember that. Things may look bad, but I have a God who's merciful, who's walking with me. He says, I want you to heal me, Lord, verse 2. If you look at the verse again, he says, be merciful to me, for I am faint. O Lord, heal me. He actually believes that God can help him. He actually believes that God can heal his circumstance. I don't think he's talking about physical healing. I think he's talking about, I want God to rearrange things here. I want this to work out better. And I think God could do that. He's praying for God to heal his circumstance. That's both in verse 2. He goes on from there and he says he wants God to turn and deliver him. He just asks for that straight away. God, turn and deliver me. Help me out here. Because he's got no other recourse. So he's going to remember that God could do this, though. And this is part of why you need to come to church. You need to come to worship when you're not feeling good. Because maybe you can't fix where you're at, but you need to remember that God can deliver. God can heal. God can turn. God can make things better. He knows this might be the case because of God's unfailing love. Underline the word unfailing. David remembers he's not loved because he's perfect. He's not loved because he's happy. He's not loved because he's confident all the time. He's loved because God is unfailing in his love. God just loves David. God loves you today. Whatever you're at, wherever you're struggling, however you feel, do not question whether God actually loves you. God's love is unfailing. And it's unfailing for everyone until the time when there is no more hope. When people have chosen to walk away. God loves you. Verses 8 and 9, I like this part too. He knows that God hears his prayer and that God hears him. I like that. He doesn't doubt that God knows who he is. He doesn't doubt that God knows what's going on. He doesn't doubt that God has forgotten him. He knows that God knows him. And in verse 9, he also says that he knows that God accepts his prayer and accepts him. Verse 9, he says, the Lord has heard my cry for mercy. The Lord accepts my prayer. He doesn't doubt. He doesn't think that God is mean to him. He knows that God wants to help. This is where I'm going to fix this first list, is in the second one. And again, I think we need to be reassured of that. I think we need to understand that. I think we need to come to worship because we get that reminder that we need. Because when you're wallowing in the first list, sometimes you forget the second list. When your problems and your troubles become too big, sometimes you forget to see what is real, even though it's still there. There are lots of times over the last 30 years that as I've driven to work down First Street or Valley Street, there's been enough fog or there's been a snowstorm or even sometimes there's been enough rain that I haven't been able to see Boundary Dam from the edge of town. But there's never any doubt in my mind that Boundary Dam still exists, even though I can't see it. Right? I know it still exists because when I come here, I turn on the lights and there's still power coming. So whether I see it or not, it still exists. It's around, it's still here, it's still doing something. I know people are going to work out there, so whether I see it or not, I know there's people there. Whether I see it or not, it still exists. And again, that's what David is talking about here. That's what he's reminding himself of. In fact, in another psalm, he says this is Psalm 34, verse 18, that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. I've used that passage in lots of sermons because I want people to know that, or in lots of funeral sermons. I want people to know that the Lord is close to you when you feel brokenhearted, when you feel at your worst. The promise is that the Lord is close, and he saves those who are crushed in spirit. David knows this. And he needs to remind himself of it. He needs to keep reminding himself that although I don't feel it right now, God hasn't disappeared. He hasn't given up on me. He's still near. He still loves me. He's still with me. I don't know where this is going, but he's still walking with me. And we need to know that. That's actually what faith is for. That's why you need to come to church when you don't feel like it. You need that reminder. Because faith is supposed to enable us to move through the storms, carrying our calm with us. And the calm we get is not that the storm disappears, but that we got some calm that goes with us. We've got God who walks with us through the storm. The storm isn't evidence that God has left. The storm is just coming. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. You will have trouble. There's no doubt. But take heart, I've overcome the world. The peace of God, it walks through the storm with us. It doesn't get rid of the storm. And so what I want you to notice again in Psalm 6, if you haven't closed your Bible yet, I want you to notice the ending. Because the ending has changed a little bit. Something has changed even though nothing has changed. David has remembered how he feels, and he's remembered the God that he serves. And verse 10 then says, all my enemies will be ashamed and dismayed. They will turn back in sudden disgrace. Again, we don't know what his problem was, but nothing has changed, but his outlook has changed. Because he's admitted how he feels, and he's prayed to God about it, and he's reassured himself that God is near, and it's going to be okay. And the psalm ends with a joyful note, because he's seen something different. He's reminded himself of what's important. In fact, scholars tell us that Psalm 7 is actually the end of Psalm 6. They were one psalm together. They know this because every sentence in Psalm 6 starts with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So it's sort of like the first line's A, and the second line's B, and the third line's C. And that carries on through Psalm 7. Psalm 7 carries on that pattern. So there used to be one psalm. And if you look at Psalm 7, all it is a psalm of praise. So he starts out feeling miserable. Then he remembers who God is. And then all Psalm 7 is just a psalm of how great God is and what he's going to do. It's changed his opinion. It's reminded him of what's real. Because here's the thing. Your direction is more important than your speed. Right? You need to get looking the right way. Maybe you're not moving very fast towards God at the moment. Maybe you're not making a lot of progress, but you just got to be looking the right direction. Direction's more important than speed. Keep going, even if it's slow. So David reminds himself to look to the proper place. Now, the temptation of this sermon, or any sermon like this, would be to end it with some sort of happy, everything's going to be great story. Tell you some story about somebody who's going through this miserable time, and then everything was wonderful, they won the lottery or whatever, and yay, everything's great. Or recount the story of Job, who goes through all this horrible stuff, and then at the end, God blesses him, 4 times more than he had before. And just tell you everything's going to be great. But the fact is that maybe that's not the ending. Maybe you're not going to get the ending you want here. The fact of the matter is that we can be healed in different ways. Healing can come by being freed of something, or by learning to bear it properly and well. Healing can come because God took it away, or healing can come because God said, well, I'll help you carry it. And it seems in this passage, David learns to carry it better. We don't always get the happy ending to our problems that we want. We don't always get the happy ending here that we want. But I'm not sure that that's the point anyway. Those of you who've been around here long enough know that I like looking at the stars, and I like mapping things, and I like knowing a little bit about constellations and stuff. I've got a star naming app on my phone. And when I point my phone at the sky, it names all the planets and all the constellations and all the stars, and I know nothing. I look at that star naming app and I'm lost half the time. I look at the sky and I have no idea where this is or that is. I know just a handful of things. I can find the Big Dipper and I can find Orion, but I don't really know a lot. And when I look at that stargazing app, I'm reminded that I know even less than I think I know, because there's so much more that I don't understand. But the point isn't that I understand, the point is that I keep looking. Because it's fascinating to me. And I think that's maybe the understanding we need to have with our faith as well, that maybe you're not going to figure everything out right now. You're not going to understand why something is happening right now. You're not going to necessarily see the purpose. But understanding everything isn't really the goal. The goal is just to keep looking. Because if you keep looking, once in a while you'll figure something out. You'll understand something. Farther along, you'll know about it. Farther along, you'll understand why, as the songwriter said. The idea, though, is don't stop looking. And so what I want to tell you today is just thank you for being here. However you came here today, thank you for coming. Thank you for being faithful. Thank you for believing that whatever's happening right now, God can do something with it. God's looking after you. Thank you for believing that worshiping God is worth doing, whether you're happy or not. The idea is that we keep on looking, that we be faithful to the end. Isaiah chapter 30 verse 18 says this, "The Lord longs to be gracious to you. He rises to show compassion, for the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all who wait for him." I don't know what you're waiting for today, but may I just reassure you that you have a God who's compassionate, who wants to give you good things. He longs to be gracious, and he longs to look after you. And even if you don't understand it right now, he is looking after you. The Lord longs to be gracious and bless those who wait on him. Can we continue to wait until we get the answer we need? With those thoughts, we'll go into the table this morning. Once again, I think we could most of us could go back through our history and we could find things to be disappointed in ourselves about. We could make a list of things where we didn't do what we ought to, where we messed up, where we could have done better. We could make a list that discourages ourselves. And lots of people carry that list around all the time, just reminding themselves of how bad they've been, how they failed all the time, how they haven't done enough. But when Jesus stepped into our history, into our world, he came to say, that doesn't matter. I know you aren't who you want to be. I know you didn't do everything you wanted to do. I know you've fallen short. But I'm here to fix it. And so every week we come back to this table and to these emblems and remind ourselves that God has fixed it for us. That when we were still his enemies, he had a plan for us. That he's looking after us. And so again, whether you're happy here today and this is a time of rejoicing, you can rejoice in the fact that you've been saved. And if you're carrying a burden today, as the old songwriter said, maybe you can leave it at the cross. And leave that burden there. Because Christ is meeting you in these emblems. Let's pray as we remember his blood. Father, thank you for the sacrifice that did what we could not do. Thank you for the blessing of your love and your mercy and your grace, even when we don't always feel it or know it, even when it doesn't seem close to us. Help us to remember that when we were far off, you made a way for us to come home. Father, help us to increase our trust. Help us to know that you are near. Help us to know that you love us. Help us to know all of this because we remember your Son's death on the cross today, that we didn't earn, but you gave us anyway. In your Son's name, amen. Father, happiness comes and goes, but your joy is something we can claim. Your joy is something we can live in. Your joy is something that can fill us even when even when things are difficult. So Father, as we drink this fruit of the vine, as we think of the blood of your Son that washes us clean, may we be filled with your joy and your hope and your peace today, as we remember not only Jesus' death, but his resurrection and the new life. In your Son's name. Amen. Once again, we've got lots of people watching on video, and so that might increase as restrictions are going. So we're thankful that you've joined us this way, and appreciate you doing that. We will see you next week.